like to call this meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. This is our meeting scheduled for February 24, 2015. It's a special meeting. Let's do the roll call, Madam Clerk.
Yes, Mr. Craney.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Grab you to remember.
Ms. Domboski.
Present.
Mr. Evans.
Here.
Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn indicated he'd be absent. Mr. Hall.
Here.
Mr. Honeman.
Here.
Ms. Johnston.
Here by phone.
Mr. Peterson. Mr. Starr. Mr. Steele.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Madam Clerk, you didn't call me.
You didn't call
Oh,
me either,
I
Madam
didn't. I
Clerk.
know. I skipped the chair and the vice chair. Mr. Trainee.
Here.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize.
Mr. Hall, could you lead us in the pledge, please, sir?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item of business is we're going to continue the public hearing on item 4A, ordinance AO 2015-13, an ordinance amending municipal code Title 8 to prohibit the extraction of tetracannabinoids. Go ahead and say it, Paul.
Tetrahydrocannabinol.
Yeah, what he said. Or any cannabinoid,
Cannabinoid.
yeah, whatever. By use of materials or methods deemed dangerous to public health and safety, unless otherwise permitted by law. So we're going to continue the public hearing and then we'll move into debate after that. Anybody wish to testify, please come forward. We've got a chair here for you. You have 3 minutes or longer.
Okay, I'll be brief. Mr. Chair, thank you. My name is Bruce Schulte.
Sit down, Bruce.
My name is Bruce Schulte. I'm with the Coalition for Responsible Cannabis Legislation. I just want to emphasize the fact that I support this direction. I understand the concern about public safety. We have absolutely no issue with that at all. I did want to just address some of the terminology in this ordinance. We think it could be made a little more clear. Specifically, the process that we're all concerned about is the use of butane to produce hash oil. That's the dangerous thing that everybody wants to get to. The ordinance as written, though, refers to a couple of other products that have nothing to do with that process, specifically keef and hash. It's a subtlety, perhaps, but I think that in the interest of clarity, both for law enforcement and individuals in their home who are doing what they think is lawful, we respectfully suggest that any reference to hash and keef be removed from this ordinance, as they are in fact redundant and not applicable at all.
Questions from the sitting room? Mr. Peterson, are you on the line too, sir?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, please reflect that Mr. Peterson joined us on the line. Questions from Mr. Yes, Mr. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you repeat again and what you think needs to be changed and where on this ordinance? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To the Chair, Ms. Gray Jackson. Yes, in the paragraph A, it says it is unlawful for a person to manufacture a marijuana concentrate, hashish, or hash oil, and then it goes on to describe the circumstances. Hashish is a term for hash or keef. That's really just the resinous glands from the plant. Those are typically extracted. Honestly, if I took a mature plant, held it by its roots, and shook it, what falls out on the coffee table would be keef, gathered together into a ball, and that's hash. No butane involved at all. There are more efficient methods of extracting that would involve dry ice or an ice bath. Also very safe processes. And it's important, I think, because medical users at home who are lawfully cultivating their 3 mature plants might very well use that process I described to make some form of edible, no part of which is dangerous. So I just respectfully suggest that we clarify that so that there is clarity, so folks understand what they can do lawfully and what they can't do because it's both unlawful and unsafe. And then, I'm sorry, if I may, there's another reference to it. Under definitions, it says manufacture means a preparation, compounding, conversion, or processing of marijuana, hashish, or hash oil. Again, for the same reasons, I would suggest that the inclusion of the word hashish in that context is not pertinent to this discussion. And then finally, on the second page, under definitions, part 2, marijuana concentrate means any product which through manufacture and so forth. Again, it refers to butter, hash, hashish, heat, oil, or wax. Those are terms that really have no meaning in the context of open blast butane hash oil production. So again, I would just respectfully suggest that in the interest of clarity, that those things be taken out. Again, we support the intent of the ordinance. We just want to see it made a little bit more clear so there's no confusion on the part of law enforcement or the individuals.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Any other questions? Paul, yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schulte, as I read under A1, line 33, hashish or hash oil, and the key words here for the intent of this language is by use of solvents containing compressed flammable gases. So if what you were describing, turn the plant upside down, shake it, collect it up, compact it, not using compressed flammable gases or other use of solvent, I don't see where that in itself on this particular ordinance for the intent is prohibited.
Through the chair, Mr. Roman, your point is well taken. My concern is that anything that is open to interpretation could be misinterpreted and misapplied. And I agree that reasonable people could interpret it one way. Equally reasonable people could interpret it another way. Being somewhat of a linguistic purist, my preference is always to be concise. And my concern is that folks will read this and they will not be clear on what they can and cannot lawfully do in their own home. And likewise, law enforcement may have questions that could easily be made to go away just by clarifying the terminology involved.
Any questions for the people who are online? Jennifer or Pete or Amy?
No, thank you. No, thank you.
None at this time.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for your time.
Anybody else wishing to testify, please come forward. Anyone at all? Well, we're going to need your name, sir, and spell your last name if you would. Sit down, sir. Be comfortable. If such a thing is possible.
Yeah. My name is Clifton, last name Benton, Bravo, Echo, November, Tango, October, November.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. I came here to testify. We can all agree that the dangers posed by the irresponsible manufacture of cannabis concentrates are significant and warrant our attention. They can be damaging to both life, property, potentially bringing physical and financial harm to innocent third parties in the process of this manufacture. We should also recognize that the production of concentrates already occurs on a daily basis in our communities. And while some methods pose significant public safety risk, there are much safer alternatives that exist and are often practiced by existing users. To overreach and completely make safe and considerate methods of manufacture illegal will do little to discourage the production of concentrates through dangerous open-air blasting, as referred to previously. Leaving the option for or encouraging users to pursue safer alternatives will do more to encourage the avoidance of dangerous practices than making all manufacture illegal. Open-air blasting is popular because of its cost accessibility, but dangerous as it involves often venting flammable material into the atmosphere in whatever local area you are, as you're all aware at this point. They can be extremely dangerous and a fire is likely to occur. It would, however, be prudent to distinguish between dangerous practices and those that are much safer. As mentioned previously, it is relatively easy to take or form a concentrate from a plant. It doesn't necessarily have to involve the process of extreme solvents or the use of releasing those solvents into the atmosphere locally. There are many other options, such as dry ice. Also, one could use methods such as like a sock slit extractor, which uses purely ethanol, which can be in the form of pure ethanol or something as simple as vodka, which can then be evaporated and run across whatever the material is that you want to use, and can then be formed into a concentrate. It is a closed loop system, and no gas or no ethanol vapor is released, as it's contained within a condenser and the sock slit extractor itself, which is just standard laboratory equipment available for most laboratory supply stores. This and other methods are already commonly used for other extraction of essential oils, from anything from sage to lavender to roses. It's not necessarily something that is limited to the manufacture of THC concentrates themselves, and are relatively safe and can occur in a controlled environment without necessarily causing any sort of harm to innocent third parties. It would also be prudent to leave options for local businesses specializing in the manufacture. If we completely shut the option for the end user to manufacture their own concentrates, it leaves them in possibly an unfortunate predicament where somebody who grew their marijuana for personal use would be unable to form their own concentrates, and they would break the law by doing so, which would be unfortunate, even if done responsibly.
Sir, clerk advises me your time's up.
Okay.
Questions from assembly members? Mr. Holman?
Mr. Benton, is it?
Yes, sir.
The descriptions that you gave of possibility of dry ice, I think ethanol or vodka, letting it evaporate, isn't listed in this ordinance. And so therefore it would not be prohibited. The ordinance as written prohibits manufacturing by use of solvents containing compressed flammable gases with the use of a solvent-based extraction method using a substance other than vegetable glycerin, unless the person is, and this is the other part of your question or concern, validly licensed and permitted in accordance with statute, regulation, ordinance.
Yes.
So one of the conundrums we have is the state is still working through the regulations on manufactured sale. And until they do, which is not until like April or May of next year, I believe, 2016.
Yes.
Currently, it's not permitted. So I believe it's a reasonable and prudent. We have to do something, I think, to make sure that their public is safe.
And I agree, sir. And I apologize, the brief point I was trying to make when I was saying that is ethanol could be considered a solvent. And in the process of running it through what I refer to as the Soxhlet extractor, the ethanol itself is boiled. As it's boiled, it then, of course, turns into a vapor. And while it runs through a condenser and then goes back across in a closed-loop system where none is necessarily released into the open atmosphere, there is still a solvent that is involved that then is vaporized. And in a worst-case scenario, if you suddenly just break all of the glass, that vapor then could be released into the immediate atmosphere, although it would be highly imprudent to do so.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson, Ms. Dombrowski, Ms. Johnston, any questions?
Not at this time.
Not for me, thank you. I don't have any either.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to testify, please come forward. Anyone at all? Hearing seeing no one, public testimony is closed. The wish of the body.
Approval. Second.
Ms. Gray Jackson moved it. Who seconded it? Second. Okay. Mr. Holman seconded it.
Thank you.
Debate? Yes, Mr. Steele.
I think it's important to note here that this ordinance, along with all the rest of them that we're doing, in a bit of a vacuum, not really in a vacuum, but things will change, and ordinances will be updated as it becomes clearer what the state's going to do, and we will, I suspect, have some updates of a lot of these ordinances as we move along. We're all in this new environment together, and it becomes difficult to do it perfect right out of the chute. So everybody needs to be a little tolerant.
I've got some other people. Mr. Holman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd like to hear from the chief. Someone referenced the concerns Mr. Schulte had brought earlier, and that is, I read the ordinance as fairly clear. Is there instructions that you're going to be given if this ordinance were to be passed in its form? I guess I'd like to know if there's, it's subject to interpretation, the ambiguity perhaps. Is it fairly clear which direction the department is going to be training? Or I guess I want to know from somebody, either law or police, that say the concerns that Mr. Schulte raised. Is it ambiguous? Is it unclear?
Mr. Weider, sir?
Through the chair, Mr. Holman, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue. Our position is that we would not view a dry ice method as a solvent-based method under this ordinance, even though ice or water can be a solvent under a common definition. It's not our intent to criminalize that aspect of it, unless the Assembly expresses intent otherwise. I would say that we are looking at a very tight or restrictive ordinance here that may be more restrictive than what some people may want, but we're doing that now to make sure that we get the message out that when you're talking about extraction, you should be on notice that there are some very dangerous methods and maybe some safe methods, but we're going to take a conservative approach, if you will, to this. The state is working on its own bills that deal with extraction methods. If the state adopts those methods and they're different from ours, we'll conform our ordinance to fit what they're doing, unless there's a local option to be more restrictive, in which case we'll wait for guidance from the Assembly or the mayor as to whether or not people make changes. So that's kind of our approach to this and why it may be different than what some people would like to see.
Mr. Gray Jackson, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if Mr. Honeman asked the same question I'm about to, but anyway, my question is, what are your thoughts on the recommendation to delete hashish or whatever, hashish within the ordinance, the recommendation from Mr. Schulte? What are your thoughts on that?
So for the definition section, which is in B, and then again on backside, the definitions we wrote are more generic. They're not necessarily confined to the notion of extraction methods. So for example, manufacture is a very broad term. It doesn't, as Mr. Honeman pointed out earlier, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to apply in every scenario where you have a concentrate or extraction under the ban in Section A. The idea here is we're trying to create some generic definitions that we'll be able to use in other areas of regulation should we propose ordinances or should the Assembly decide to take up other issues. We're trying to write definitions that we don't have to change over and over and over again. We're trying to write broader. So for purposes of marijuana concentrate or extract, we view hashish, and so on, all these different formations to be a form of concentrate or extract. For manufacturer, you can manufacture hash oil, for example. So we're trying to be more inclusive in those, even though that particular portion of that definition may not apply in the ban that we're talking about in Section 8.
If I can follow.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schulte also recommended removing hashes in the actual law itself. Okay, so I guess my question is, what's your thoughts on if somebody was to make an amendment to do that?
Through the chair, that section on page 2 at lines 10 through 12 just throws in some common names, right? So hashish and hash, or hashish and hash oil, whatever formations might be slang for people to use, to the extent they're the same or different. We're just trying to capture some common names as different formations of extract or concentrate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, sir. Mr. Evans, sir.
Yeah, I guess it's my understanding that since, I think, 1978, Alaskans have been allowed to have marijuana in their homes for their own use, and it's also my understanding that some folks have been extracting THC and doing these other methods all that time. I guess what I want to know is why are we having a special assembly meeting today to all of a sudden stop this practice, which has been going on apparently for years, if not decades. If anybody can answer that.
Through the chair, with the Assembly's indulgence, I would like to show a video that addresses this issue. We've shared this with the media. It's a video that comes out of Colorado, and just like Alaska and other places, marijuana has been used in Colorado for a very long time, but they've seen a dramatic increase in these dangerous methods, and this video demonstrates that very well. It's about 4 minutes.
And I'd be glad to watch the video, but although Colorado didn't have legalized marijuana,
No,
decriminalized
the
marijuana.
usage of marijuana on a scale as many other states have.
Mr. Ritter, how long's the video?
It's about 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes.
I think it'll help us in our debate portion if we do watch the video. Mr. Evans, sir?
I can hold the rest of my questions after the video if you want.
Mr. Hall, sir? Julia?
And Dennis will, and Todd will correct me if I'm wrong, but the Colorado had medical marijuana for a few years before they had the retail marijuana. And so the video showed that you'll see, if I understand Mr. Wheeler correctly, is that Colorado, once they had the retail part, had the upsurge, even though they hadn't had much of that going on in the years that they had legalized medical marijuana.
Ms. Johnson, do you want to participate in the debate portion now, or do you want to wait till the video's done? I know you
I'll
can't
wait.
see it, you can probably hear it though.
I'd be glad to wait, thank you.
Same thing to Mr. Peterson and Ms. Dombowski?
Yeah, I'll wait.
I'll wait too.
Okay. Dennis, do you want to start the video? Let me hit the light, thank you.
A new marijuana product is blowing up on the West Coast called Shatter.
It's still kind of new. Like, it's still really for like the upper echelon smokers.
Making Shatter from marijuana massively increases its strength.
It's more concentrate, and so you're getting more bang for your buck, basically. My first experience, I felt like I was moonwalking. You know, it was a trip.
And that makes it a drug dealer's dream.
So this is Chatter.
Super concentrated. It's light, easy to transport, and it goes for big bucks.
Chatter's the most expensive thing on the market right now. It's more expensive than crack. We're paying for the best of the best of the best.
Shatterman cooks some of the purest shatter in California and sells it to dispensaries.
You see how see-through that is?
But the process is so dangerous, it's been outlawed in 49 states.
They treat us like we're making crack. We're making a medicine that's the purest medicine there is.
It may be a medicine, but making it can be deadly. And across America, amateurs are risking their lives trying to master the dark art of making shatter.
You squish it down, make sure.
Stay away from making it. Don't make it at home. If you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't do it, definitely. You can blow yourself up, burn your face, burn your family, burn your house down, hurt everything in your neighbors, your whole block. It's not the way to go, man. Just stick to what you do. Skateboard, ride your bicycle. People are blowing themselves up left and right. They're giving us a bad name.
Shatterman is about to prepare a new batch of shatter.
So you gotta load it with as much as you can get in there so you get the most yield. Now we got the butane going.
With liquid butane vapors cascading onto the floor, he has to be very careful.
All right, that's smoking. If there's a spark or any kind of cigarette flame or anything, it's gonna explode because it's liquid butane. And there's so much going into the air right now.
One spark, and Shatterman is toast.
If you put a lighter over this right now, it's...
But for cooks like Shatterman, the profits outweigh the risks.
You're doing something every night, you're probably looking at about $5,500 every other day. Yeah, we're just about there. Gotta get it all. It's all worth money.
Once the shatter is boiled down and has been left to set for 1 or 2 days, it's good to go.
finished product. It's got good clarity, it's got a good color, good smell. It turned out good.
Shatterman is one small part of the multi-billion-dollar marijuana industry that has sprung up through the cracks in America's laws.
Thank you, Mr.
There's a few
Evans.
photos here that were part of this production that was put up by the Colorado law enforcement agencies. According to the agencies, these are all photos of houses or apartments where people were attempting to make this stuff. Watch the house right here in this corner. These are victims who suffered injuries from, this is pretty graphic by the way, I should warn you. These are photos of folks who were trying to do extraction.
Is that all, Mr. Wheeler?
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
Yes, sir. My concern about this is not that I obviously, have any problem with, prohibiting that type of activity. It's more about our credibility as a lawmaking body. What I'm concerned about is this idea that we have the special meeting today because we suspect there's all of a sudden going to be some kind of rise in use or performing this type of activity. I don't see anything that's changed in the law. I mean, it's still legal to have in your house like it has been for decades. People have been doing the extracts, I assume, for decades. There's no commercial market yet in Alaska to buy this stuff, extracts or otherwise. It's still legal to sell and buy. Why is it we're doing this today as opposed to next year when there's a it's presumably regulated market that will include extracts and things like that for people who actually want to use it for medicinal purposes to obtain legally and not have to do it in their house? I guess because my concern is that we look like we're just overreacting to a situation that has really no evidence is going to change dramatically from what it's been for the last decade as of tomorrow. And second, I guess I'll let you answer that, but I mean, and also I would just say that if blowing yourself and your house up is not a sufficient deterrent, I doubt that the Class A misdemeanor will be any sufficient deterrent to stopping this, but I understand we have to do what we have to do. But the timing issue I'd like to hear about.
Through the chair, Mr. Evans, thank you.
Winner.
What I can say is this is what you saw is a relatively new problem. Colorado has experienced it, and as other states have, California obviously has concern with it. So we're reacting to what is becoming a problem that wasn't necessarily a problem 10, 15, 20 years ago on a level that you're the kind of attention it's drawing from government officials now. So we are reacting. I don't know that we're overreacting. This is part of what governments do, which is to put the notice out there that this is partly a public education component to this, to say, draw attention to the fact that this is a very dangerous activity. True, we can only do it as a misdemeanor at the local level. Should it be a felony? Maybe it should be a felony. I don't know. We'll see what the state does with their provisions. But the reason for doing it now is because it's a problem now. To the extent that we're legalizing marijuana, we suspect that more people will do it than ever before. It's certainly what we're seeing in other places that have legalized it. That means more opportunity and more people who are novice and new to it who may see something and decide, let's try it. If they hear about this being a problem, maybe they'll be far more careful. Maybe they won't do it at all. What you're seeing there is not legal manufacture, even though they may be operating in some place that would otherwise be legal if they were in a properly licensed and safe facility. To the extent that the state allows that methods for extraction, we assume that will be under a licensing process that will make sure the method is safe and the procedures are safe, and there's protocols in place to make sure people are injured. But that's yet to be developed.
Mr. Evans, sir?
Yeah, I mean, is it such an urgent issue that it couldn't have taken place at our next regularly scheduled assembly meeting, as opposed to having a special meeting in the middle of the week?
Through the chair, Mr. Evans, I think we may have said this at the assembly meeting, and we certainly have said it at the committee that Mr. Paul chairs, and that is, we've been trying to identify issues that may be of immediate public safety concern. And we already worked on consumption in public place. This is one more in a list of things that were brought to our attention by law enforcement in Colorado that we might want to address as early as possible. The earlier we can let people know that they shouldn't do this kind of extraction, the better off we think we will be.
Sir?
Yeah, finally, and in Colorado, I think it's passed a law prohibiting this as well. What's been their experience before and after they passed the law?
Through the chair, Mr. Evans, I'll turn to Mr. Sherwood on that point.
So to describe a little bit Colorado's experience, we've got to go back to the year 2000 when medical marijuana became legal in Colorado. They didn't really do anything with it. They didn't have a regulatory scheme for it until the Obama administration came in 2009 and said we're going to have a hands-off approach on medical marijuana. Then they began regulating it. Interestingly enough, the number of people involved in the medical marijuana program went way up once the state had a very regulated system, and with it came some of the interest in concentrates. So that happened about 2010. Then they vote for recreational marijuana to become legal in 2012. The date it becomes legal is January 1st, 2014. So they've had 1 year experience with recreational marijuana. What we were told was they were actually shocked by the increase in the level and use of concentrates across the board. This is one way to get concentrates, what we're talking about today. Now, state law in Colorado addressing this basically says municipalities may regulate hash oil extraction, whatever name they use. They've taken different approaches. Denver, for example, what they've done, they had an ordinance to just ban it across the board, all methods, all ways, unless, and the unless was you're licensed. So within their licensing scheme, for example, you're never going to get licensed if you're in a residential area. I would guess probably not if you're in a commercial area, probably only in an industrial area. This guy in the video, although he puts himself out as some kind of a poster child for safety, I can tell you from what we learned that's very unsafe. And we did, one of the organizations, Denver Relief it was called, we went to their grow operation, and they were setting up what was, they hoped would be a permitted BHO extraction unit. And what was interesting is if you think of a walk-in cooler, it was like that, but what it was a paint booth type of thing. There was a graded floor where solvents could drop through. It would have, I think, a positive airflow, so everything's going out. I believe a person operating in there would be in a Tyvek suit and a face mask. So there's a lot of things that they were going to have to go through to get licensed. And like I say, the interesting thing in Colorado, every time it became, shall we say, more legal, the increase in the use of marijuana and marijuana products went way up, and they were constantly operating almost behind the curve. And to go back for a minute, in Alaska, Raven, the Supreme Court decision that said you could have marijuana in your own home in a small amount under the privacy clause of the Alaska Constitution, and having been a former prosecutor for the state, even though many people described it as marijuana is legal in Alaska, by and large, I would say it wasn't really treated that way. It's not near the same thing as what ballot measure 2 has done. So I think there's a difference in perception. And people get interested, they get excited, they want to try this. They know that concentrates have higher THC, you get more of a buzz. And the concern is very irresponsible things are going to happen. And as you said, blowing up somebody's house may, if that's not a deterrent, what is? But a huge part of the public safety concern is with 10, 20-foot separation in houses in Anchorage, that you're going to blow up somebody else's house, or the duplex next door, or the apartment above you. And so we just feel it's better to act now, and then as events progress, as the state takes steps, then we can modify and amend as needed. But there's so much attention paid to this February 24th date, it seems like this is the time to act.
Mr. Evans, anything else? I've got others, sir. Okay. Mr. Holdeman, sir.
Well, first of all,
By the way, we've been joined by Ms. Domowski, in live and in person.
I'm sorry I missed the video.
It was
Sounded titillating.
I think we're in the discussion phase of this ballot,
Yeah, we are.
of this ordinance. So, well, since the ballot initiative, I share with colleagues, and I'm going to defer to the chief in a minute, so be prepared. Since the ballot initiative, there have been some in our community who have been possessing, either uninformed or mistaken, or maybe just flaunting. I don't know. But when contacted, some of them basically say, "Well, it's legal, dude. We just passed this in November." And yet it was very well, I believe, media. I mean, much like don't drive after you've been drinking. There's PSAs out, for God's sakes, that have been for decades, and yet people still do. So there are, to the point Mr. Evans has said, has there been some extraction going on? Certainly, I'm sure there have. Raven decision since the 70s has allowed, if you will, possession in your home up to 4 ounces, which is a high number of marijuana. So I still, to this day, wonder and scratch my head at why we even decided to go the direction with the initiative, other than to clarify how to sell or transfer if you don't know how to grow it yourself. And even though it's universally understood and it was written that was that way, I think the best example of people that won't follow the law no matter what you put in front of them is our speed laws, our speed signs. I mean, there's numbers that are pretty clear written in black and white. Everybody universally understands you're supposed to do that, to follow those laws and not drive any farther than that, any more excessive than that. And yet it happens. And most of the people, I would say, a higher percentage of people do follow the law and want to follow the law, and oftentimes they just don't know. And so I think this is very timely to make sure that people do know that there are some things, there's some limits about what we in our community feel in the interest of public safety is not acceptable in our community. And I think it's very timely, and it's unfortunate we didn't have this passed earlier, and I know there was some notification issues. So I'm going to ask the chief here, and maybe I'm not allowed to know, or if there's anything you can share with us. My belief is, and I suspect if there have been some attempts, or perhaps there's efforts underway to try to be on February 24th to do high-level manufacturing, maybe butane shipments or commercial entities trying to, I've understood that in the Seattle area or Washington, there are actually companies that are trying to draw people because it's also legal in Washington. Is there an effort, are you aware of any efforts that are underway to do large-scale manufacturing, like using February 24th as the date?
I don't know about, I have to make an assumption on the 24th. We are aware of individuals in Anchorage, several of them, that have received shipments recently of equipment for the purposes of making concentrated hash oil. Now, whether it's the butane hash oil scenario we saw there or more advanced equipment, I can't tell you that. I think it would be pressurized systems based on what our research has shown. So I think it would still be illegal equipment, but it might be safer than the butane thing. But I'm a novice at this, so I can't say for sure. But I do know we have actionable information about people who've ordered and received stuff that would be, I believe, illegal under the current ordinance. So while I can't say that no one has manufactured hash oil in Anchorage, can't say that. But it's not something we've been on our radar screen until just recently. And I think what we're hearing is, as alternative forms of marijuana become all the rage, that there's an explosion, sorry, no pun intended, of interest in these other ways to consume marijuana, and that we need to get ready for them. In fact, I think, don't want to speak out of school, but I believe I heard Mr. Schulte testify in Juneau last week that maybe leaf marijuana is going out and being more and more replaced by edibles and some of these other things. That's kind of where the industry's going. So I think it's, I'm new to this, I got to tell you, but I think what we're seeing is a shift in interest, and we're trying to get ready for that, because even though there might not have been a big history of doing this, we think, we're afraid that there could be a lot of attempts, and we are seeing that interest translating into shipments of such equipment from the lower 48.
So just to follow up, I want to express to my colleagues, thank you, Chief, that in the interest of public safety and health, obviously, even those unintended victims who they themselves, I'm sure they didn't try to set out naked and stuff to explode their house or to burn themselves. So I'm really just concerned more about neighbors and their kids in the house, not maybe even their own, that aren't aware of what dad or mom might be up to. And so I think we need to make sure that I believe it is timely, and again, I wish we could have done this weeks ago, but maybe it's just evolving knowledge that we're getting into some concerns. So I would ask that we pass this, and if at some point in time there's some allowance under the regulations of the state, or even at the municipal level to allow commercial manufacturing in a safe and approved manner, then I'm willing to look at that. But until then, I think we need to make sure we're protecting our community.
Ms. Dombrowski, ma'am, a motion to approve the ordinance in front of us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I felt a lot the same way that, I'm not being very articulate, I felt very similar to the way Mr. Evans felt when he started talking, because I kept thinking, if we pass a law that says it's a misdemeanor to do this, really is that going to deter anyone? Probably not. But then I listened to Mr. Wheeler this morning, and his comments, to me, it seems the effort to do this now is an educational piece for the public in order to say, hey, look, this is one part that's very dangerous. You could not only put yourself in jeopardy, but your neighbors. So, you know, taking that into consideration, it made me also think of a gentleman I heard on the radio this morning. And I look at this as an opportunity to kind of set the stage. We have gone through, and many of us have said, if this is an industry that we're going to embrace, it needs to be done in a thoughtful, responsible manner. And I think people on both sides say the same thing. But the fact is, there are operators out there that honestly don't care what the law says. They're going to do it anyways. They're not waiting for the rules to develop. They're going rogue. And if they get nailed with a misdemeanor, when it comes time for a conditional use permit, those are the bad kind of operators I don't want operating in my city. So thoughtful, responsible operators that really care about the health and safety and welfare of our community, those are the type of business people that we want to embrace. So with that said, I will be supporting this, which is surprising because I wasn't sure I was going to this morning, but I will be supporting it. And I think it's just one more tool that we as a community, as we start to develop the strategy in dealing with conditional use permits, all these different things, it'll be an opportunity for us to go through this in a collaborative, thoughtful, and safe manner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, madam. Mr. Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this is the latest that's coming before us. The committee is meeting regularly, and we're meeting with our legal, our enforcement, our zoning, and yes, the clerk's office. Mainly because we know there's a lot that we've got to address prior to, well, one was prior to today. The other one is going to be the 24th of February of next year, and then of course we're really going to have to be ready come May, because our intention is we're not working to create any barriers to this business. But what we've been told loud and clear when we had a lot of public testimony on this was everybody said they wanted it safe, accountable, and responsible. So when any one of these departments identify to the committee that this is a concern of theirs, such as a description of a public place, a clear definition, it was also brought to us immediately upon return from Denver that the using butane was a major concern in Denver. They were trying to play catch up with it and an ability to get out ahead of it. So you will find on a regular ongoing basis, we are going to be bringing ordinance changes or code change or even bringing all of our current code into compliance to allow for this product. But as different departments bring to us issues that we need to address, we will be sending that forward with a recommendation to the body that we act on this so that we are ready when this is a full-blown legal. So be prepared, there's going to be more coming. And yes, the clerk's office, we've got a significant amount to do in there because come April, May of 2016, I have no idea how many licenses are going to be going to the clerk's office applying for conditional use permits that are going to be coming to us. So we've got to look far enough ahead to make sure that we've got the staffing that's going to be necessary during that time to be prepared. So the committee is supportive of this ordinance. Mr. Ravens, I don't know that it was necessary to do a special meeting for it, but it was an ordinance that we felt needed to be addressed early on so everyone in this community understands this is illegal. It won't keep certain people from doing it, but there are some that maybe it will. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston, on the motion in front of us to approve this?
Most everything's been said. I'm for safe neighborhoods, and I'm also for allowing landlords some safety in their facilities, and I think this gives it right away. So I'm in support. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be supporting this as well. I just think that it's important that we get this done today, and we send the message that no, we're not banning the manufacture of concentrates, but what we are doing is we are recommending that people use best practices not to endanger themselves or their children or their family and neighbors. And so I think this ordinance does that, and so I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Other comments from assembly members that are here before we conduct the vote? Madam Clerk, please conduct the vote.
Mr. Trainee,
Yes.
Ms. Gray Jackson,
Yes.
Ms. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Honeman,
Yes.
Ms. Johnston,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Steele.
Yes.
Mr. Trainee, that passes 9-0.
That is approved 9-0. Next item of business, the executive sessions are none. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We're adjourned.